I actually used to work for the NOAA on quite a few projects that mainly involve mapping certain parts of the ocean and studying the geology and ecosystems on the seafloor. I was technically a contractor and wasn't employed directly by them, but that's more of a semantic issue, I guess. There is one thing that happened to me while on a dive in a submersible, and I want to share it here. It was actually the last thing I was ever involved in, although I didn't know that at the time. And this is because I couldn't handle it. I was stressed and left quite traumatized, and I felt like, I don't know. I felt like I came very close to losing my life that day, and I could not handle the thought of that at all. So, this actually happened back in the 1990s. I was a part of one of the DSV crews that were being sent around 13,000 feet underneath the Arctic Ocean. Now, the Arctic Ocean is often considered the least explored ocean on Earth, and this is for very good reasons. The ice and the low temperatures makes operating equipment down there very difficult and a lot more expensive, and so submersibles have to be custom built to be able to withstand colder temperatures and for all of the gear to operate down there. So not only do you have to worry about the pressure, you have to worry about these other variables too. I was not the pilot of this vessel. I was actually just a mission observer. This is just a fancy way of saying that I worked as a scientist, and my job was essentially to note down any of our findings and operate the data logging equipment, and also to take photographs of the surroundings using the cameras equipped to the vessel where possible. I'd done this job in the past, and so it was not anywhere near as daunting as it could have been, but still, it's always a risk going down into the ocean like that. You always have the thought in the back of your mind that absolutely anything could happen. It was a major privilege to be a part of a project like this. It was not something that happened every single week. This was basically a once-in-a-lifetime thing for me due to the restrictive costs involved in the project and all of the time and the money that was invested. Again, we had 2 DSVs going down there that would be probably around a couple 100 feet apart at all times. The idea was that one vehicle could survey while the other documented and supported the operation, but it could also give us an advantage with the amount of area that we could cover at once. We were able to use lights and cameras to monitor each other, but because of the silt being constantly kicked up and the limited reach of our lights in that pitch black darkness, we would not always be able to make out more than a vague shape. We were in constant communication, but because we had to use a hydrophone, there could sometimes be a slight delay due to the distance apart. This could be anywhere from around a second or less than a second and not be noticeable at all, or end up being a few seconds delay if there ends up being some kind of interference or the distance grows too far apart. I guess I'll start with what we found down there, because that is basically when everything went wrong. Up until that point, the mission was going exactly as described, and we had absolutely no hiccups whatsoever. I was not clued in before the mission got underway, but apparently, there had been some kind of structural anomaly detected on the sonar before we spotted this thing. It was hard to make this thing out at first, even with our lights shining on the thing. It was half sticking out of some bits of rock and was basically nestled on this little outcropping of rock. It had silt covering a lot of it, and it looked to be caked in seaweed and moss over most parts of it. What looked like seaweed and moss anyway, because at this depth, those plants would not get enough light to grow and survive, so it looked like it, but I didn't actually know what it was. It's just the closest description that I can give you. But once we got a little bit closer, it almost looked like it was some kind of a disc shape. Not exactly, but it's the easiest way to give you an idea as to the shape of this thing. It was some kind of silver color that looked quite dull to my eyes, and it had a ton of what looked like rust all along the bottom half that was sticking out. Imagine a completely flat disc, but on the top half, you have kind of a spire type thing that starts out quite wide but slowly thins as it gets closer to the top, and then at the very top it has some kind of a tip, almost like the tip of a spear is how I would describe it. The lower half of this thing was strange. It had some kind of metal beams or something poking out of it that had some kind of clear hinges where they could bend. They almost had some type of prongs on the end. They looked like some kind of futuristic legs. Now, imagine this image that I just described to you in your head, except it's actually bigger than our submersible in terms of width. It was probably as big as a shipping container. We got a really good look at this thing, and we were just in awe. Like, I was so blown away, it took a while for it even to occur to me to start logging what we were seeing. The image we got was not a high resolution at all, and we did not get a chance to take another one, because out of nowhere, it was like we had some kind of disturbance in the water. I'm not sure what it was. It felt like a wave, but obviously it wasn't. It felt like something big had moved in the water and displaced so much of it that we shook. Literally out of nowhere, I felt the DSV suddenly being shaken, and all of a sudden, I could not see straight anymore. The pilot actually panicked just a little bit, and because we were so close to view this thing, he accidentally disturbed a little bit of the sediment using the vessel. We were actually laughing, because he was a really proud man and talked down to a lot of other people, claiming his piloting skills were unmatched and all of this other empty bravado. We were in contact with the other submersible, and they pretty much did not believe us at all when we told them what we were seeing. Then my attention got brought straight back to the thing, because something was happening. It was really faint at first, but I could see some kind of light that was quite dim, slowly starting to emanate from this thing. It was like this sickly golden yellow, which started really dim and gradually got brighter and brighter until it seemed like it was lighting up everything around it. While this was happening, the thing was starting to vibrate. Like, it was just shaking from side to side, and it was slowly becoming dislodged from the rock, and the silt in the sediment was just being sent flying. Whatever it was must have been quite heavy, or had a lot of power, because we were experiencing slight shakes coming from where this thing was displacing the water. We were actually moving away from this thing. The pilot was quite concerned that being too close might cause some type of damage to our DSV, and so he was just maintaining safety protocols. The crew in the other DSV, once this thing was lit up, they were now telling us that they could see the light. They were asking us what the hell was going on and what we had found. After this, I saw two things that I just can't even really explain. I saw something shoot off of this thing, some kind of energy, as it started slowly raising from the rock outcropping and began floating. Not exactly energy, but it's the best word I can use. It's hard to describe because it was so quick. It was just a slight flash for a split second. It looked like forked lightning in the sky, just shooting out from the top of this thing, except it was almost the same color as the ocean in front of me, and I was only able to make this discharge out because of how intensely I was staring. It didn't cause any problems or interference with sonar or navigation, but it did actually cause our communications with the other vessel to become a lot more staticky and a little bit more delayed. The other thing that I saw, well, I saw it detach something from itself. When it raised up higher towards the surface, it actually detached those leg-type things from its craft, like it needed to shed some weight in order to have enough thrust to propel itself. That is not the part that bothers me though. When it detached the legs, it also actually detached some kind of ball or sphere that was clearly made out of the same type of metal as the main craft. It almost looked as if there was an indent in the sphere where there was a pretty faint light coming from out of it that made it look like an eye. It seemed to shine this light around 360 degrees, and then out of nowhere, it just shot off at a speed that I had never seen before from anything in this world. It shot away from us, towards the direction of the other submersible, and the crew there started shouting about how they felt an impact on their side. There was so much shit kicked up that all I could make out from the other DSV was their light and just their vague outline, along with something Something really faint. A light, I guess it was. It was so small and faint, like a red laser pointer. I swear I could not tell if I could actually see it, or if my eyes were just playing tricks on me. And then came the horrible part. The really awful part. Something that I still cannot really believe that I saw with my own two eyes, and what still haunts me to this day. The craft, it stopped shooting itself upwards. It actually let itself drop back down, and it floated actually below us and the rock outcropping for quite a ways, basically until it was shrouded in darkness and we could not see it anymore. We were all trying to figure out what we had just found and what that was all about, when we suddenly just saw it hurtling upwards rapidly, almost at an angle, shooting up away from us. We could feel it again, and it caused us to rock. And we saw this thing actually hit the other submersible. I wish I was kidding. I went from seeing the vague outline in the lights to just seeing it gone. The light just snapped off, and the outline I could see, it became two outlines, and I could see the outlines of different bits just flying off around. We actually heard them. There was a tiny little delay due to the interference, but maybe half a second after we saw that craft collide with them, we heard the beginning of a scream that cut out almost instantly. We heard the start of a scream and a horrible, groaning, creaking sound, which told me that the exterior had been compromised and that they had likely been crushed due to the depth. It would have been a literal implosion. We never ended up seeing the aftermath, and I'm actually grateful that I didn't, because I think I would still see it in my nightmares to this day if I did. Everything happened so quickly and so slowly, all at the same time. It seemed like I lost all perception of it, although I seem to get that feeling a lot whenever I've been down that deep. The aftermath was not pretty at all. A crew had to be sent down to retrieve the wreckage and to investigate, and we had to completely abandon what we were doing. There's no way we could have carried on after that happened. Our higher-ups were pretty pissed off, but I think they were honestly more concerned about the wasted investment and the bad PR that such a high-profile disaster could bring along to them and their operation, and cast increased scrutiny on them due to the budget allocation from taxpayer money. We had to give interviews and testimonies, and it was just a really long process. It felt like I was being interviewed for a criminal case, like I was on trial for a crime that I did, even though that was not the case at all. I think they were looking for any reason to blame it on our incompetence and user error than anything else, if it was possible. But yeah, it was just a really long process. We handed over any logs and data and photographs, but even then, it was like they were refusing to believe us, to believe the evidence right in front of their eyes. They were quick to dismiss any of our claims and came up with BS excuses about how the outline that we captured on the photographs could not have been a craft, and etc. How the readings that we got weren't consistent with any other type of vehicle, and blah blah blah. I did not have the energy to waste fighting with them in this verbal war. Like I said, it just seemed way too quick. I don't know. The reaction that I got, it was like they were trying to convince themselves, and it just really rubbed me the wrong way. That could just be my paranoid mind connecting the dots that were not there though. I got to talk to a trusted friend who I worked with quite often. His name was Jimmy, and he was involved in a lot of pre-dive checks and was overseeing the surface support vessel just above us. We got to talking at a quiet little coffee shop, and he made me swear to keep it to myself, or at the very least, never ever mention his name when repeating this story back, because it could get him into a lot of trouble. Jimmy is a false name, by the way. He was not the only one who saw this, of course. He wasn't a team of one up there, that would be silly. But he was the only one who wasn't clammed up about it, who was willing to talk to me. Everyone else pretended like you were crazy. He said he saw the object that we described. At least he thinks so. It apparently broke the surface of the water at a great speed, and for a while, all they saw was a tower of water shooting upwards. He said that before this, his vessel was actually experiencing a little bit of turbulence and was a little bit unbalanced, but that he did not know exactly at what point that was for us down there, so it could have been entirely unrelated. Once the splash had stopped, he could make out the thing, which was now hovering pretty high in the sky, to the point that he could not make out all of the details of the craft, even if he squinted. He said that after this, it did not stick around for long. He said that the craft detached something from itself. He said it looked quite cylindrical, like some kind of a tube, but it had this light attached to it that made it look like a flare hurtling through the sky, until it eventually dropped down later on and just seemed to extinguish. After this, the craft seemingly disappeared is how he described it to me, but if I'm being honest, his explanation was all over the place and kind of exasperated. It really shocked me actually, since Jimmy is such a well-spoken dude and way more articulate than I am. He said that the thing started to grow fainter, almost like it was becoming more translucent before his very eyes. And as it did this, he said it looked like it caught fire, but the flame was fading just as much as the craft was. He said it was not there for long, that this happened within maybe 20 or 30 seconds at most, and by then, all he could see was the sky shimmering and rippling, and this thing was not there anymore. He told me that 5 minutes later, he heard a splash off in the distance, but he did not see anything physical. He told me he was not sure if that was related, but thought to include it anyway. So, yeah, that is what I experienced. You can take it however you want, but I just wanted to get it off of my chest, since it's just been rattling around in my brain for so long. The whole experience was not as cut and dry and as simple as I made it out to be here. I just did not want to waste both of our time with technical terms and internal processes that you likely would not understand and that would just bog down the story. The situation was not just hand-waved away and buried like it seems. There was far too much money involved for that. It never made it to the press, I know that was made sure of. I can still see the vessel when I close my eyes and go to sleep sometimes. That image of the silhouette of the other submersible just suddenly being collided with and splitting. It happened in just a second, way too fast for me to even process properly. It's the only time I've ever had an encounter with something I cannot explain. Okay, so, I don't know if this is paranormal or not. I don't even know 100% if it's all real, or if I'm so paranoid and messed up that I'm mixing things up. Either way, I feel increasingly more afraid and alone, and I do not expect to get any help from anyone listening. I just need someone to listen. As some background, I am bipolar. I take a daily SSRI to control my symptoms, and I do as much spiritual stuff as I am able to try and keep myself balanced. By that I mean I volunteer my time as often as possible to help the homeless community there. I have a full-time job at a local low-cost health clinic. I exercise for 30 to 90 minutes a day. I see my parents at least once a week, and I have one old-ass senior cat. I mean to say that although I am very mentally unwell, I manage. I do everything in my power to stay balanced. So for the most part, you usually cannot tell that I am bipolar at all unless I'm off my medication. This story starts about 3 weeks ago. My girlfriend broke up with me, and I was coping as best as I could. I am a worky person, so at this time in my life, I deep dived into every single activity possible and worked to try and keep the bad feelings away. I had a regular day at work, and when I got out, I went straight to the soup kitchen to fulfill a shift I had volunteered for. I have a regular called Kevin, and he came in as usual this day, but he seemed frantic, which was not usual. Kevin was a drunk and maybe a little bit slow, so seeing him wound up was pretty rare. He told me he met a woman in a wheelchair who seemed like she needed some help. He introduced us, and yeah, she needed help. She was emaciated and scattered all over the place mentally, and wheelchair-bound. Her name was Faye, and she was, in addition to all of these things, very charismatic. Since I worked at a low-health clinic, I arranged for her to be picked up and brought to the clinic the next morning for an exam. If I'm honest, she seemed schizophrenic to me. She was very charming and witty, but in the middle of speaking with her, her eyes would seem to glaze over, and it was almost like she was distracted by someone else talking to her, even when there was nobody else talking. So I wanted to get her help, not just physically, but mentally too. The next morning, I was doing my rounds as usual at the clinic. I am a nurse, so while I knew that Faye was scheduled to be seen, I would likely not even see her the whole time that she was there, and I did not think anything of it. That was, until I heard someone screaming my name. In fact, I could hear a whole commotion coming from the hall. I ran out, and I was surprised to see her, wheeling furiously down the hall. Security was right behind her, and there was another nurse giving chase too. The other nurse grabbed her wheelchair handles. She began to scream my name like bloody murder now. To my surprise, she actually stood up and began to dash down the hallway directly at me. The other nurse grabbed her shoulder and she fell to the ground, shrieking, "Stop, you're hurting me," is what she screamed out. "Anon, save me," is what she screamed after that. I didn't really know what to think. Eventually, they got her up and into her chair, and then they asked her to leave. Her behavior got her disqualified from not only her courtesy wellness and psychiatric visit, but also from our shuttle service. I didn't know how she would even get home, and even though I felt bad, I mostly felt freaked out, so I decided to finish my shift and not worry about it. When I left the building, to my surprise, there was Faye, sitting right by my driver's side door. "Anon, I knew you would save me," she cried out. I was kind of mad now. I would have gone straight back into the building, but it was already locked up. But I didn't want to be too courteous and have her think that the way that she acted was okay, so I told her to get away from my car. She asked me for a ride to her camp. I said no. I told her I could call a cab at most. She whined a bit, but I reminded her that the shuttle would have taken her home had she not caused a scene. So I called the cab for her and prepaid over the phone. She moved away from my car. I told her goodnight and I went straight home, which was only about 3 blocks away. A few minutes later, I got a call. It was the cab driver. The woman was apparently not there when he went to pick her up. He asked if he should wait. I told him not to worry about it. I was out $15, but whatever. You can't help someone who won't let you help them. The next morning, when I went to go outside for my usual morning jog, I was shocked to see that all of my planters outside were smashed and the plants seemed to have been stomped on. I have a mulched yard. I could see what seemed like drag marks through the dirt and mulch, as well as clear footprints that tracked dirt onto the concrete path. I turned back around and went into the house to call the police. They came out and took a report from me, but there was only so much that they could do. I had my suspicions that it was Faye, but there were no witnesses at all. I could not prove it. I didn't care. Really, I wanted a record more than anything else. I went to work as usual. Everything was fine at work that day, and I had a shift scheduled at the soup kitchen that night. I didn't see Kevin that day, which was weird, but I didn't see Faye either. When I came home, everything seemed fine. I unlocked my door and set my stuff down. I began taking off my shoes, all of that stuff. I realized that my cat, Apollo, never actually came to greet me. I got up to track him down. I turned the corner into the hallway and froze. The back door was wide open. Apollo was a door darter for sure. I knew he was gone. I searched and searched for hours, well into the night, but I never found him. He is microchipped, so even though I was hysterical and sad, I was a tiny little bit hopeful. I was so caught up in the search that I did not think to call the police about my back door being open. I know for a fact it was locked before. I cried myself to sleep that night. I barely slept at all. The next morning, I went to the bathroom to take my medication. They were gone. I searched frantically for them to the point where I was in tears, but they were just gone. There is logically nowhere else they would be. I don't take them anywhere with me. I always keep them in my house. That way I can never lose them and never be short of them. I called the police and filed another report, which made me massively late for work again. This time, the cops were not so helpful. The questions he asked me made me feel like I was the suspect. He was treating me like I was crazy. The pharmacist treated me the same way. I had just picked up a refill the week before, so she was acting like I was a druggie or a peddler. I started to get worked up and really tearful, which she told me was drug-seeking behavior. She told me that if I did not leave, she would call the police. So I went to work, late. I was barely hanging together. The lack of sleep, the fear that someone was in my home, my Apollo missing, my meds gone too. I could barely keep it together at my work. My performance suffered. My parents came to visit me that weekend, and they tried to help me find Apollo, and they tried to help me get my meds. Neither was fruitful. I don't have a driveway, but off-street parking instead. When my parents went to leave, they realized that the tires on the street side of their car were both slashed and completely flat. Again, we called the police. This time, they told us to only call if we had an emergency. They told us that they were serious calls that I was getting in the way of. When everyone left, I was lonely and exhausted and tired. By that Monday, I had barely moved from my spot in the bed. I called out of work that day. On Tuesday, I replaced my morning jog with another search for Apollo. When I came back, my front door was wide open. I know I locked it. I know that I did. I broke down sobbing and I called the police again. They told me that they would be there to take a report, and then 2 hours later, they called me again and told me that this was not an emergency and that I needed to come straight to the department if I wanted to file a report for something non-emergent. I figured that someone breaking into my home was pretty urgent, all things considered. I went to work, and I got fired for poor attendance and performance. I guess I was not as good as I thought I was before all of this started either. Because of all of the stress and the depression of being fired, I stopped going to my shifts at the soup kitchen too. I thought, what was the point? Last night, I felt watched in my own home. When I looked outside my window, I could see someone with a small frame standing in the backyard. They seemed to be staring at me. This was the day I also realized that the spare key that I hid underneath the stairs on the porch was gone. I have not found Apollo, and I'm beginning to think that I never will, and I've been off my medication for like 2 weeks by this point. I don't know if I'm just spiraling out of control, or if this girl is really stalking me, pretending to be in a wheelchair and apparently is a master of stealth. All I know is that this is the most isolating, scary experience of my life. I tried to be smart and responsible about the situation, but now, I'm just afraid. I'm afraid for my life and for my safety. And I don't know when she might let herself into the house again. So far, it's only been when I've not been there, as far as I know anyway. Absolutely anything could happen to me. I have no way to track, and I have no idea what to do. Without any concrete evidence, the police will not even take the time to deal with me. They won't come and help me at all. It's like they want me to get fucking stabbed or murdered before they will even take the time to come and help me. I am going to get my locks changed, but I'm not sure it will stop everything. And I'm still really, really scared.